So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We are super excited to dig in with the one and only Andrew Chen, general partner at Andreessen Horowitz and author of The Cold Start Problem, which, by the way, has now sold over 100,000 copies. Easily one of the most exciting and prolific business books to hit the stands this year. Andrew, thank you so much for being here at the summit.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. It's great to be
Great.
here.
Yeah, so today we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in connecting the dots. So for folks that don't know, we'll spend a few minutes digging into the cold start problem and some of the big ideas in the book. So you'll get a little bit of a Cliff Notes sense of what goes on inside of the content of Andrew's awesome book. And then we want to connect those concepts to the universe of partnerships. And I want to ask a few questions of Andrew around, how the things that he's studied deeply in the universe of network effects, cold start problems, atomic networks, and the like might be relevant to the folks that are not just building partner ecosystems, but per the theme of the day, using those partner ecosystems to drive growth, to drive sales, and ultimately to build bigger and better companies. So we get to see firsthand at Crossbeam the way a lot of this new technology can be leveraged to make ecosystems an efficient growth lever. And I think the concepts that Andrew has been able to develop and communicate so well through this book are going to be a great source of new knowledge for the whole group here. So super excited to dig in. I do want to shout out that we are keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A on the side panel. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes toward the end here. If folks want to toss in questions, we will try to get to those.
Yes, ask us questions. It'll be more fun if you
do. Yeah, Andrew's. I said to Andrew before we started, the best version of these talks is just when he and I have a chat that would be the same exact chat we had one-on-one in a private room, only we happen to be on stage, which I think will come true here today, but might amount to me just peppering him with questions. So we can mix things up with bringing things in from the chat. So with all that said, Andrew, I want to give you just the floor for a couple of minutes here and give you an opportunity to maybe just talk through a little bit of the core concepts that we would find in the cold start problem, and just to give us some vocabulary and grounding for our talk today.
Yes. Well, again, great to be here and good to see everyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually just do a couple slides. It'll be 5-6 minutes where I'll just summarize kind of the high level of what I talk about in the book, and then through that I'll kind of weave a little bit about my my professional background, which hopefully will be interesting to all of you. So what I'll do is try to get this screen share to work. Okay, I think this is working now. Great. All right, here we go. So this is my book, The Cold Start Problem, which I took 3 years to work on, and it was published late last year. And as Bob mentioned, it's sold just under 100,000 copies, which is really fantastic for a for a business book. And so I've just been so excited about the reception. And the book is really about what we do at Andreessen Horowitz. And for those of you that know a little bit about us, we're a venture capital firm started by the Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who were both at Netscape together and helped develop the modern browser as we know it. And we've been really lucky to go and invest in some of the most interesting and iconic companies in the industry. Companies like Airbnb and Clubhouse and Figma and Lyft and Oculus and all these great companies. And one of the big things when I joined the firm, so it's been 5 years now since I've been at A16Z. When I first arrived, I was just like, wow, like what is it about these companies that are just so special? And one of the concepts that just kept coming up over and over again is sort of one of the primary ways that we sort of evaluate if a product has like staying power, if it can really build and grow over a long period of time, is this concept of network effects. And a lot of these, by the way, are consumer companies, but also you see this you see network effects often take hold for B2B companies, especially that are sort of bottoms up, and PLG driven, such as Figma and GitHub, and Zoom and Slack and a lot of these. And we're going to also talk a little bit more about enterprise and kind of developer ecosystems and that kind of thing as well. But it's this concept that sort of really happens in the industry, more broadly. And so now in my 5 years in venture capital, it's just a topic that I've gotten excited about and did a bunch of research and put together. And so so first of all, like, worth just quickly summarizing, like, what is actually a network effect? Like, when people talk about it, like, what is it about this term that makes it so powerful? And one of the surprising things I learned in my research, when I did it, is it's actually a very old idea, right? So over 100 years ago, this is actually the front page of a newspaper, of the SF Chronicle, when the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell. As soon as the telephone was invented, and initially it was very very much a niche technology. There was a shareholder SEC filing where Theodore Vail, who was the chairman at the time, said this about the telephone, which and then of course the company he was running at the time, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, we of course now know as AT&T. And so what he said was, a telephone without a connection at the other end of the line is not even a toy or a scientific instrument. It is one of the most useless things in the world. Its value depends on the connection with the other telephone and increases with the number of connections. So this is sort of, the argument that, like, the actual physical item of a telephone by itself, that hardware is not in itself valuable, right? That functionality, those features, that product is not inherently valuable. It's the network that the telephone connects to that is that makes it valuable. And so when you look at these, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, source control, right? Why do you use GitHub in your workplace? Well, it's because all the other developers are using GitHub. Why are you using Figma? It's like, well, all the other designers are using Figma, or my designer, if I'm a PM, is using Figma. And so as a result, you have that coordination that ends up happening. And so this often arises in B2B collaboration tools and communication products. It often arises in developer ecosystems and partnership ecosystems, as we'll talk about later. And these are all things that ultimately drive the concept of network effect. And the thing that you're the most concerned about, the thing that you're the most these products end up being very hard to build. And the reason for that is, I use an example here, which is the Dropbox product Paper, which is for documents and notes and so on. And one of the things when you look at Dropbox Paper is, if you open it up at work and you see that none of your coworkers are using it, and it's just blank, and in fact everyone instead is using Google Docs, or they're using Box, or they're using some other product, you're going to decide that you're going to go off and use something else. And by the way, same for Microsoft Teams, and same for if you're going to be using GitHub versus other products. And so I know about this. I know about the kind of the problem of how do you get a lot of people to coordinate together and to use a product all at the same time, because again, when the value of the network is really in the network as opposed to the product. Because earlier in my career, before I worked in venture capital, I worked to drive a lot of the growth efforts at Uber, particularly on the driver side. And one of the things that you were always so worried about was when you had a situation where there were no cars available. You opened up the app and there were no cars, and so that meant that your network was not functioning. And as a result, even if you had the right app, if you didn't have that network working correctly in the city, well, it just wouldn't work. And same thing for eBay, and same thing for a million other examples that we could use. And so this problem of, you have a networked product where the value of the product is really in the network, but then if not enough people are using it, then the experience just doesn't work. Well, that's the cold start problem. And if you don't solve this, it'll kill your new product. And so whether it's a marketplace company, or a developer platform, or a workplace collaboration app, or multiplayer game, or any of these things, they all kind of share this. And so what I do in the book, and we'll talk about some of the concepts, is I basically break down the process of hey, if you were to go and go step by step to create one of these new products, what are the different phases that you face throughout the period? What are some of the things that you have to solve along the way. And how is it different, for one phase of the cold start where no one's using it, and you're trying to get your first 100 customers, versus once things are really working and going well. And so that's the book. It was fantastic to write. I ended up interviewing the various founders of companies like Slack and Zoom and Dropbox, and some very senior folks at Microsoft, and some really great people, at Google, and as well as a ton of consumer companies. It was a blast to write, and so now it's out there, and it's been really fun to engage in the community around it.
Amazing. Thanks for that overview, Andrew. And yeah, that gives us a really good jumping off point here, because there's a natural question to ask, the elephant in the room question, which is, this is all awesome. What's it have to do with partnerships, and what's it have to do with driving sales through partnerships? And I want to posit kind of a thesis for you, which I think is some of the reason we've got you here today. And kind of, I want you to call me out on if you think I'm talking out of school here, or maybe yes and me if you think it makes sense. But not every company is fortunate enough to have network effects built into their DNA. And in fact, with a lot of those businesses that you just described, it's very true that whether it is Slack or Dropbox or something on the consumer side, the nature of how that company was founded and the way the product delivers value, it kind of inherently creates these network effects and forces them to overcome the cold start problem, and that they have this incredible growth engine. But for many of the companies in the audience today, it's possible that none of those things are necessarily true in the day-to-day way that the core business works. But there might be other ways that network effects can come into play via different growth models that they might pursue. And one of those is partnerships. And I think one of the things that we've been able to help enable companies do at Crossbeam is actually start to tap into their own partner ecosystems and start to see some of these upsides that you get out of network effects emerge from a healthy partner ecosystem that powers things like co-selling and co-marketing and cross-selling. And, those examples being digging a really awesome and valuable moat, getting really incredible economies of scale, where once you get an initial, for example, developer ecosystem up and running, that growth can compound and lead to more developer lock-in and more people building on that ecosystem. And I'm wondering, you talk a little bit about Microsoft in the book, and I think it's a great example, but I'm wondering if you could expand a bit on the way in which establishing partnerships and enabling partners is in and of itself a network effect, and some of the ways that companies might encounter those effects out in the wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, Bob, I completely agree with you that not every company is blessed with the ability to have network effects, right? I mean, you sort of, but you strive towards building that in somehow into your strategy, and it's the kind of thing, it's the kind of topic that comes up in boardrooms, because as you become more and more the market leader, or as you get traction, you of course naturally want the whole market to tip over and pick you, right? Why wouldn't you want that? And so what we end up finding is that in a lot of cases, and we'll go straight to Microsoft as a good example of this. Microsoft, of course, for many years was primarily a enterprise company, primarily sold Windows through their OEM partners, and many of the the end users were ultimately there for business. And one of the interviews that I had with Brad Silverberg, who was the lead at Microsoft for Windows 95, that I thought was just so fascinating, was he said, look, Windows 95, yes, you had the Mac already. We had kind of a couple different iterations of Windows. We did the start button. We did, we built kind of the GUI that was going to be, embraced by developers. But the thing that really made Microsoft Windows sing, and the thing that really, in his view, made them dominant in the industry, was actually Visual Basic, right? And the reason why he said Visual Basic was such a big deal was because they built Visual Basic to be easily usable by business users, the same way that we think of spreadsheets today, to build very simple applications. All of a sudden, you saw tons of use cases, long tail use cases in the enterprise, where people were building really simple kind of like order intake kind of things, or they were inventory trackers, or all sorts of things that were too narrowed for any software product that you could go out and buy, but people could build it inside of Visual Basic. And what that meant was as Windows became more and more used in the enterprise, and more of these Visual Basic applications were being created, it sort of created that network effect, kind of virtuous cycle thing where people wanted to build more of the applications, they wanted to use more of the applications, and it just sort of went and went and went. And I think that is, Bob, like the one of the great ways that we see companies create network effects in the enterprise, which is by allowing for, by opening up APIs, by creating a developer ecosystem. You look at what Salesforce has done over the years with App Exchange, and it's not, it wasn't necessarily obvious right at the beginning of the CRM industry that you were gonna, that plugins and like what, Salesforce apps were gonna be such a big deal. Same thing with Shopify, right? But as soon as you kind of get enough scale that you can support that, that does create kind of a multi-sided network between developers, the company, and then the end customers. And, they can all kind of serve each other in a way that makes that ecosystem more powerful than everyone else's.
So powerful. That's really awesome, Andrew, and it's a great segue too to some of the concepts that show up in the book that help people start thinking about where to start with this. This is the nature of the cold start problem, is that it's really hard. I mean, we experienced this at Crossbeam. We have some pretty organic network effects in our model, and it took us a year to get to our first 100 companies on the network, and it was a lot of glass chewing, a lot of exhausting the Rolodex. But one of the things that got us through it, and now we're up to 11,000 companies that are using the platform. Those early days were really heavily defined by something that I didn't have a name for until I read your book. And it turned out that that thing was atomic networks. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the concept of atomic networks and how companies can maybe use them as building blocks to get those early signals of value out of a network, even if you don't have dozens or
Yes.
hundreds of partners to bring on board.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think one of the pieces of disservice that we do as an industry is when we talk about partners, or we talk about developers, or we talk about customers, we tend to gravitate towards whatever number is the biggest, right? So we say, oh man, we have like 20,000 customers. It's so amazing, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens as a somebody who's maybe working on a new product, is that just that number just sounds daunting, right? And so
Mhm.
the concept of an atomic network is to say, no, 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 don't focus on that, right? Like those are these big aggregate, what are sometimes called vanity metrics. These are things that make the CEO feel good, but may not be the metrics that actually drive the business. And actually, instead, think about if it's a network product, like going back to let's continue on down the path of kind of like Shopify and the plugin companies that sort of plug into Shopify. Is all of those developers, you kind of have to just start with thinking, well, what is the minimum set of things that I actually need in order to get a segment of my audience, maybe not my entire customer base, but just a segment of my customer base happy. And so if Shopify's has a set of people that, for example, if you're starting a new Shopify competitor and you were focused on, let's say, cosmetics or something like that, and you said, okay, well, I need like a warehouse, solution, and I needed this, and I need a labeling thing, and you were just said, okay, I kind of just need like 4 developers in a company, and I can serve a segment. Maybe that's all that you need to get started, right? And to get the cold start, problem, like get all the like start to solve that. And so once you have that minimum set, then off you go. Slack kind of did a similar thing when they launched, where they figured out that like the smallest set of users that they needed was they just needed like, you know, three people inside of some of their startups that their friends had created. If they could just get 3 people on Slack, you might get a team that would then use Slack on a daily basis. That's all you kind of
Mhm.
needed. And so you kind of have to think of that for yourself as to what your product can accomplish. And instead of jumping straight for like trying to create the marketing plan to get the 20,000 customers from scratch, you have to think about like, what's the smallest number that you need in order to get retention to be good and for it to be sticky enough. And if you can create one atomic network and then a second atomic network and a third one, you probably can make a fifth one and a 10th one and a 100th one, and then like off you go. So I think those are really important.
Yeah, that's really, I feel like that maps well to even just core principles around product market fit. We just launched this product called Sales Edge, which used to be called Partnered. And it's this tool that basically helps sales reps use the data from their partner ecosystems to source new deals and communicate with reps at their partner companies, and basically kind of completes the last mile of co-selling. And
Hmm.
the way we're bringing this thing to market is not saying, hey, let's recruit your 500 sales reps to do the entire co-selling process soup to nuts. It's really about getting an end-to-end solution in place so that you can do your classic crossing the chasm work and get the early adopters and the active folks on and using the product, because the very nature of that product then creates this viral behavior that has network effects to it. You're cross-selling across company lines, and in a weird way, you get kind of this micro network effect on top of the mega network of companies being connected.
That's right.
And I feel
That's right.
like, yeah, I feel like that any company could use that in any environment where you've got a product you're bringing to market that connects the dots between company lines. And that applies as well to developer ecosystems, API ecosystems, tech
Yep.
partnerships, like
Yep.
getting that first partnership on and up and running soup to nuts all the way through the value chain is so much more valuable than getting 20 or 30 of those companies to the top of the funnel in
That's
conversations,
right.
or
That's
getting,
right.
10 of them to read your user docs or kick the tires at a hackathon. I think that's really profound,
That's right.
kind of
Well,
advice.
and Bob, I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that in the context of your company, because I think for many well functioning startups, it is kind of obvious in many ways that, like, yeah, of course you start with a smaller network, and you try to get that to work, and then you kind of grow it from there. But I think the pressure for the folks in the audience that are either at bigger companies, or they're running companies that are getting bigger and bigger, is you often think, oh, well, this new initiative that we're working on, the only way it's valuable is if it generates, X million dollars in the next year. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of pressure to just do a big bang launch and try to get everyone excited, rather than actually taking your time and building, that atomic network that's really, really strong before you move on to the next one and the next one after that. And so that is one, like, common recurring pattern that I saw across many of the companies I interviewed.
Yeah, that's actually leads me to something I was curious to pick your brain about, which is, another elephant in the room here today is the macroeconomic situation, right? And the shift of focus that's happening at a lot of companies toward not just growth at all costs, but economically efficient growth, and being able to figure out ways to acquire and establish new sets of customers in a way that actually makes sense from an ROI perspective. And I wonder if, if you were writing the cold start problem today for today's audience and you had a chapter in there about the economic implications and efficiency,
Yeah.
are there things that you think you'd put in there? And what do you think is relevant in today's environment about the
Yeah.
lessons from the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the so the way that I talk about network effects in the book is that it's really three different forces, right? There's an acquisition network effect that's basically using your ecosystem, using your network to acquire, more people into the network, right? More companies, more customers into the network. There's an engagement effect that's really built on, the more people that join the network, the more activity there is. And then a monetization effect, which is about being able to monetize users better as the network fills out. And
Mm,
I think, in a world, Bob, where a lot of I mostly work with startups, and startups are primarily trying to focus on, how do they make sure that they get kind of a steady enough upwards, kind of like top line trajectory in their business, right? On revenue or monthly actives or whatever metric they're tracking. And one of the big things that with a network effect is it allows you to use your network to attract customers, rather than spending a lot of money on brand
mm,
marketing and advertising, and putting all your money towards Facebook and Google and all that stuff. You guys may have seen, by the way, in the news that Airbnb announced that they actually basically fully paused their performance marketing,
mm,
and they're going to work a little bit more on brand marketing, but they have the luxury of being able to do that, because the more people that use Airbnb to host, the more attractive the platform is for somebody who's renting, and the more renters there are, the more people want to host there. And so they have that network effect that ends up recruiting people to Airbnb and they end up not needing to spend as much. So I think, in this macro environment where everyone's so sensitive towards go to market budgets, I think leaning into network effects is actually a great place to go. And for everyone that's working on partnerships, to make sure that your partnership activities and efforts are really, really efficient and they actually feed into the core kind of virtuous loop of your company, rather than being kind of, I think these days we're going to find that less efficient ad hoc custom deals, things like that, will look more and more, unattractive relative to things that sort of feed the, feed the core machine.
That's great. One of the things I loved about the book is you do a really good job of poking holes in your own theories, and kind of calling out, when the chickens come home to roost, right? With
Yes.
network effects, you got a whole section called the ceiling where you go into all the things that can kind of go sideways, particularly once you get to certain levels of scale. And your Airbnb example, I find it fascinating because um, the ad networks, they have incredible network effects themselves. So, whether it's Google's AdWords or Meta advertising, the fact that Airbnb can turn those off because it's got its own network effects creates this interesting like network effects versus network effects, who's going to win battle, right? On both sides. And it makes me think about the challenges that companies might run into around things like saturation and around you have a section in there called the law of shitty click-through ads, or shitty banner ads, I think is that section. And I wonder if you can expand a little, I guess, on there's something to be said for decay in these networks and
Yeah.
the sustenance of product quality over time. And maybe you can give us a minute or two on that, and then we can take a question from the audience
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
they
Sounds
kick
good.
us
Yeah.
off.
Well, so the law of shitty click-throughs is a great kind of just microcosm of this, right? So the law of shitty click-through says, like, look, if you go back 20 years ago and you look at banner ads, there was a point where banner ads were actually like a 60 or 70% click-through rate, marketing channel, which is just amazing. And of course, as people got used to them, and as it became less and less of a thing, these days it's, average banner ad is like a 0.1% or something like that. And then we saw that with email marketing. By the way, when we first all were getting, text spam, and companies were texting us, for when our politicians were texting us for donations, I'm sure that worked really, really well. And then, and the response rate goes down over time. And so I
Mhm.
think one of the things that you just see is that customers and the ecosystem and everyone kind of like acclimates to, whatever has happened already, and as a result, the performance goes down. And so I think, that's something that all of us have to continually, figure out is, look, if you have a partnership strategy or you have a go to market that is the same, in over the last 5 years, in a world where, by the way, we're all going to, short form video, and the whole world's going to cloud, and the whole world's going to, like the whole macro is changing. Well, it probably is true that your methods, are not keeping up. And so I think from a network effect standpoint, I think, all of us have to figure out, okay, well, given the idea that all of these different kind of flavors of go to markets will saturate over time, it becomes super important to be like, okay, well, how do you keep it fresh? Like, in terms of your offerings. So, and then, yeah, let's take a couple questions, and we'll go from there. I know we're starting to
Amazing.
run out of time.
Pulling those up right now. Getting some questions around community and how it could play into the network effect. Maybe this is an intersection of two strategies here, but I'm sure they're related. A
Mhm.
lot of companies doing community-led growth. How do network effects play in there?
Yeah. Well, I think, so the way that I would think about it is, in a lot of cases, the networks around a product are deeply embedded, right? When we talk about the telephone, we talk about Instagram, being able to follow people and being able to comment on other, the network is really deeply built into the product. Now, sometimes, like, that is like, that's just not as possible, for whatever product that you're building. And so I think there's the next level up where you can kind of get a weak form flavor and benefit of this is to build a community around your product. And so even if your product is like, I don't know, like like Casper mattresses or something, or if it's just like, like a fan favorite, like it's like a car, it's like a Tesla, like if you build a community around what you're doing, you get a lot of the benefits of network effects companies, because you can use your community to acquire more customers. You can use your community to plan, events and conferences and things to reactivate your community. You get a lot of that. And then the question is always, well, if you're putting so much effort into the community, is there a way to build some of the features into the product itself, whether that's community news or communication forums or things like that? And so, but it's definitely like kind of the gateway drug into, building, embedding your network into your product.
Amazing. I'm getting the signal from our friends in the booth that we're coming up on time here, but Andrew, this time flew by. I feel like we could do 2 hours on this, and I'm glad we got to dig into some specific areas. I want to thank you and the whole A16Z team for everything you've all done for the partnerships community, and of course, the great work you've done through your book. Everybody, definitely head out there and buy the Cold Start Problem. Let's bring Andrew to 200,000 copies sold. And hey, Crossbeam just announced that Supernode 2023 tickets are on sale June 5th through 7th in San Diego. We had hundreds of partner professionals out in Philly last year for a really exciting event. We're going really big this year. We're taking it to the West Coast. So early bird tickets just went up on sale, crossbeam.com/supernode. So hope to see you there. Thank you all so much. And Andrew, again, can't wait till next time. This has been great.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Al.
Thanks all.